The range officer barely looked up from his clipboard when the elderly woman approached the counter. She wore a faded floral cardigan and sensible shoes, her silver hair pulled back in a simple bun. When she quietly asked if she could try the advanced precision rifle course, the two young men behind her burst out laughing. One of them, a muscular guy in tactical gear, actually slapped the counter. "Ma'am, maybe stick to the beginner pistol lane," he said, smirking at his buddy. "This course is for serious shooters." The woman didn't argue. She simply nodded and waited. If you believe respect should be earned through action, not just words, comment respect right now. Her name was Margaret Chen, though everyone who knew her decades ago called her Maggie. At 73, she looked like someone's grandmother, which she was. She had 6 grandchildren and spent most Sundays baking cookies and tending her garden. What nobody at that shooting range knew was that Maggie had spent 28 years in the Marine Corps. She'd been one of the first female scout snipers, back when women weren't supposed to exist in that world. She'd served in conflicts most people had forgotten, in places whose names never made the news. She'd trained hundreds of marksmen, perfected techniques that were still being taught, and held records that remained unbroken. But she never talked about it. After retiring, she'd simply wanted peace. She'd come to the range that Saturday morning because her grandson had given her a gift certificate for her birthday. He thought she might enjoy an afternoon hobby. She hadn't held a rifle in almost 15 years. The young range officer, barely 30, finally processed her waiver with visible reluctance. The guy in tactical gear was still chuckling, telling his friend about his own military experience, 4 years in supply logistics that he somehow made sound like special operations. What none of them could have known was that the quiet woman patiently filling out paperwork had once made an impossible shot that saved an entire platoon. The advanced course was empty when Maggie walked onto the range. The targets were set at various distances, some stationary, some moving, some partially obscured. Wind flags fluttered along the course. The range officer handed her a standard rifle with obvious condescension, explaining the basics as if she'd never seen a firearm. "Safety on until you're ready to shoot, ma'am. Breathe slowly. Don't be discouraged if you don't hit anything." Maggie thanked him politely and moved to the first station. She checked the rifle with movements so practiced they were muscle memory, adjustments so subtle the officer didn't even notice them. She settled into position, and something shifted in her posture. The grandmother disappeared. Something else emerged. Before anyone could blink, she'd fired. The distant target, 600 yards out, showed a perfect center hit. The range officer's mouth fell open. She moved to the second station, adjusted for wind without hesitation, and fired again. Another perfect hit. The tactical gear guy had stopped laughing. He'd come out to watch, his arms crossed, his expression changing from amusement to confusion to something approaching concern. Maggie continued through the course with mechanical precision. Moving targets, obscured targets, rapid position changes. Every single shot found its mark. Her breathing never changed. Her hands never shook. It was like watching someone perform a dance they'd choreographed in their bones. Within minutes, a small crowd had gathered. Other shooters stopped what they were doing. The range officer stood frozen, his clipboard hanging forgotten at his side. Maggie finished the course and carefully cleared the rifle, setting it down with the same quiet care she'd shown when she arrived. The range officer checked the electronic scoring system 3 times, certain it was malfunctioning. Perfect score. Not just perfect, but the fastest time they'd ever recorded. He looked at the elderly woman like he'd just watched someone walk through a wall. "Ma'am," he stammered, "who are you?" Maggie smiled gently. "Just someone who used to shoot a little," she said. She started to gather her things, ready to leave, when a voice cut through the stunned silence. "Gunny Chen." Everyone turned. A man in his 50s had entered the range wearing an instructor's badge. His face had gone completely white. He stood at attention so fast it looked painful. "Gunnery Sergeant Margaret Chen." The room went completely silent. The instructor, a retired Marine himself who ran the Ranger's advanced training program, looked like he'd seen a ghost. His hands were actually shaking. "Stand down, Martinez," Maggie said softly, but there was authority in her voice that made everyone in the room straighten unconsciously. "I'm retired." Martinez didn't move. "Gunny, you trained me 22 years ago at Quantico. You were the senior sniper instructor. You're the reason I made it through." He turned to the stunned crowd, his voice thick with emotion. "This woman is a legend. She held the Marine Corps record for longest confirmed kill for 17 years. She developed half the techniques we still teach. She trained 3 generations of scout snipers. He looked at the tactical gear guy who'd gone pale. She probably trained your instructors, whoever they were. The range officer looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him. Ma'am, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I should have. I shouldn't have assumed. Maggie waved him off kindly. You didn't know because there was nothing to know. I'm just a grandmother now. That life was a long time ago. But Martinez wasn't finished. He pulled out his phone, made a quick call, and within 10 minutes, the range owner arrived. A retired army colonel who'd heard Martinez's breathless explanation. The colonel, a decorated veteran himself, approached Maggie with visible reverence. Gunnery Sergeant Chen, it's an honor. I've read about you in training manuals. I've studied your techniques. The tactical gear guy tried to slip away quietly, but the colonel stopped him. You laughed at her? It wasn't a question. The young man's face flushed red. I didn't know, sir. I thought she just looked like someone you could dismiss, the colonel finished. Like someone whose service didn't matter because you couldn't see it. He turned back to Maggie. Mum, would you consider doing a demonstration? Maybe sharing some of your experience? We have young shooters here who could learn so much. Maggie hesitated. She'd left that world behind deliberately, seeking the quiet life she'd earned. But she looked around at the faces watching her. Young men and women who were trying to learn, who were serving or had served. One condition, she said finally. No special treatment, no ceremony. I'll talk to anyone who wants to listen, but I'm not here for applause. The colonel agreed immediately. Word spread through the range like wildfire. Within an hour, every shooting station was filled with people who'd come to watch. Maggie spent the afternoon doing what she'd done for decades, teaching. She showed them breathing techniques, explained wind reading, demonstrated position adjustments that seemed impossibly subtle but changed everything. She was patient with mistakes, encouraging with improvement, and absolutely uncompromising about safety and discipline. The tactical gear guy, to his credit, stayed and listened to every word, his earlier arrogance completely gone. During a break, Martinez told the gathered crowd about Maggie's service. The missions she'd supported, the lives she'd saved, the barriers she'd broken when women weren't supposed to be capable of what she did effortlessly. He told them about the time she'd held position for 36 hours in hostile territory, making a shot that military analysts said was impossible, protecting a rescue operation. He told them about the instructors she'd trained who'd gone on to train thousands more. He told them about the techniques she'd pioneered that had become standard doctrine. And through it all, Maggie sat quietly, uncomfortable with the attention, more interested in helping a young shooter correct her stance. As the day ended, the range officer approached her again, carrying a small plaque. Ma'am, we'd like to name the advanced course after you, the Margaret Chen Precision Range, with your permission. Maggie looked at the plaque, then at the young people packing up their gear, some of them still practicing the techniques she'd shown them. She thought about all the years she'd spent teaching, all the students who'd gone on to serve with honor, all the lives that had been saved because someone had learned to shoot straight and true. Only if you promise something, she said. Promise that anyone who wants to learn is welcome here, no matter what they look like, no matter how old they are, no matter if they seem like they belong. The range officer nodded, tears in his eyes. I promise, ma'am, and I'm sorry. I'll never make that mistake again. The tactical gear guy approached last, his head down. Gunnery Sergeant, I need to apologize. What I said was disrespectful and ignorant. You've served more and done more than I ever will, and I judged you based on nothing but appearance. I'm ashamed. Maggie looked at him for a long moment. You learned something today. That's what matters. Take that lesson with you. Respect isn't about what someone looks like or how old they are. It's about who they are and what they've done, and sometimes the most important people are the ones you'd never notice. The young man nodded, his eyes bright. I will, ma'am. Thank you. As Maggie left the range that evening, the sun setting behind the mountains, she passed the new plaque being mounted on the wall. Her name, her rank, her years of service. Martinez saluted as she passed, and she returned it with the precision of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. She climbed into her modest sedan, the same car she used for grocery shopping and picking up grandchildren from school, and drove home to the quiet life she'd chosen. But something had shifted. She'd been reminded that service never really ends, that the skills and knowledge earned through sacrifice have value beyond the uniform. The next weekend, Maggie returned to the range. Not because she had to, but because 3 young women had called, asking if she'd teach them. They'd heard the story, heard about the grandmother who'd outshot everyone, who'd served when women weren't supposed to, who'd never forgotten that skill and character matter more than appearance or assumption. She taught them, and they told others, and slowly, quietly, Maggie found a new mission: teaching respect through action, showing that worth isn't visible on the surface, proving that the people we overlook might be the ones with the most to teach us. The range became known not just for its courses, but for its culture, a place where everyone was judged by their character and dedication, never by their age or appearance. Years later, when Martinez retired, he told the story at his ceremony. The day Gunnery Sergeant Margaret Chen walked into his range and reminded everyone what a real warrior looked like, how she'd taught him, decades before, that precision came from discipline, that excellence came from humility, and that the deadliest shooters were often the quietest ones, the ones you'd never see coming, the ones who didn't need to prove anything because they'd already proven everything. The grandmother in the floral cardigan who could outshoot men half her age, who'd served her country with distinction, who'd trained the trainers, and who'd never asked for recognition or respect, only the chance to serve.